Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Ardra Manasi, Senior Program Coordinator for Advocacy and Partnerships at Center for Women's Global Leadership, CWGL. On behalf of the Global 16 Days campaign, coordinated by CWGL and our co-sponsors today, International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC, Solidarity Center, Asia Floor Wage Alliance, Global Labor Justice International Labor Rights Forum, Tamil Nadu Textile and Common Labor Union, Sex Workers and Allies South Asia, SWASA, and Sangram. It's an honor to welcome you all to this parallel event, Femicide in the World of Work, How the Gendered Aspects of Lethal Violence Are Being Ignored. Before we begin, some housekeeping. Please be aware that the session is being recorded and also live streamed via Global 16 Days Campaign's Facebook account. Please note that the interpretation is available in Spanish and French. If your preferred language is English, please choose the English channel by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll be sharing a participant survey and also resources from the Global 16 Days campaign and event co-sponsors in the chat box. So please do watch out for these. To briefly give you an overview about this event, in 2021, on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Global 16 Days campaign, the campaign adopted the theme of ending femicide, or the gender-related killing of women and girls. We will be continuing this theme this year. Alongside, from 2018 to 2021, we have continued a multi-year theme of ending gender-based violence in the world of work. Our advocacy efforts since then has focused on calling on governments to ratify the ILO Convention 190, which is the first international treaty to address violence and harassment in the world of work. Femicide occurs in both public and private spheres, including the world of work. Women workers, both from formal and informal sectors, face varied forms of gender-based violence. If unaddressed, these instances can lead to femicides in the world of work. In some countries, murder is the second leading cause of death for women at work. In such context, ILO Convention 190, along with other legal protections and political commitments, can be instrumental in preventing and ending gender-based violence and also femicide in the world of work. To this end, in 2021, on Human Rights Day, we launched a petition calling on the United Nations to declare December 6th as the International Day to End Femicide. December 6th is the anniversary of the Montreal Massacre, where 14 women were murdered. We'll be sharing the petition link in the chat box. It would be great if you can sign the petition and also share it among your networks. Today, we have a very distinguished panel today. Before we begin, I would like to welcome and also introduce our moderator, Rose Omamo. Rose Omamo is the General Secretary of the Amalgamated Union of Kenya Metal Workers. She's also a member of the ITUC Women's Committee. Rose has played a prominent role during the negotiations leading to the adoption of ILO Convention 190, and she has moderated several global webinars focused on ILO Convention 190. Rose, may I kindly request you to introduce the speakers and also moderate the panel.
Thank you, Nishi. Thank you for giving me the floor to also introduce the speakers. And let me join you in saying that this is a very important webinar today for us, where we will share a lot in this webinar. I want to start by introducing Isela Jurez, who is the president of the Citrasemka Municipal Workers Union in Tocoa, a small city in the embattled Agun Valley of Honduras. Sister Isela is herself have endured sustainable anti-union attacks and threats against the leaders since the union's foundation in 2009, and that tells you who she is, and we are expecting to hear a lot from her. I would also take this opportunity to introduce Ayesh Rai. Ayesh Rai is a sex worker by profession. She holds the position of a coordinator with the National Network of Sex Workers and Allies South Asia, and is a member of Vesha Ayar Mukti. And we will have time to hear more from her in our panel today. My next panelist is Jiva M. Jiva M is the General Secretary of Tamil Nadu Textile and Common Labor Union, a Dalit women-led trade union representative, 11,000 women workers in Tamil Nadu. And India, Jiva, who hails from the Dalit community. She has worked for more than 5 years in the Tamil Nadu textile industry, both as a garment worker and also as a spinning mill worker. So this is a great woman that we will really love to hear from her. Our next panelist is Femicide. She is the Vice President General of the Maritime Workers Union of Nigeria, the Vice Chair of the Women's Commission at the Nigeria Labour Congress, and the Vice Chair of the Women's Committee of the ITF Nigeria chapter. And she holds diploma in accounting from the Maritime Institute of Technology in Maryland, USA, and from the Michael Imodu National Institute for Labor Studies in Nigeria. These are very wonderful speakers that we have today. Next is Ann Buda. Ann Abuda is from the Philippines. She lives in Kuwait. She is the chairperson of Sandigan Kuwait and Sandigan Kuwait Domestic Workers Association. Her determination to protect domestic workers' rights stemmed from her own experience of having faced abuse. And that is very interesting for us as we look forward to hear from her. My second last speaker today is Mariam Monsef. She is the co-founder of the Red Pashmina campaign and the former Minister for Women and Gender Equality in Canada. Our last speaker today is Chantal Flores. She's a Mexican independent journalist investigating the impact of enforced disappearance of women in Latin America and the Balkans. She also reports on gender-based violence, mental health, and human rights. Her work has appeared in publications, as you will hear maybe from her later. Thank you. Those are my panelists for today. And so after introducing the panelists, I believe, Nishi, we need to get into the business of the day. And I believe our panelists, you are ready. As has been highlighted earlier, we will have 3 minutes for each panelist to speak. I want to also ask all our participants to use the question and answer chat box by sending their questions and answers in the chat box so that you can get your respective responses. Please mention the person whom you want to answer your question or direct it directly to our speakers. And with that, I think it's time that we can now enter into the discussions for the day. So sisters attending, I want to ask our sisters panelists to be ready now for our questions and answers that I would ask you today. And I want to start by round one. We will have 2 rounds of questions and answers from the panelists. but also the participants are urged to send their questions in the chat box. So I would start by my sister, Isiela. Sister Isiela, in some countries, homicide is the second leading cause of death for women at work. And the perpetrator is usually a co-worker or a third party, based on your advocacy work with the Honduran Network Against Anti-Union Violence and with trade unions. Have you documented incidents of gender-based violence and femicides among women workers in Honduras? What are some of the challenges faced by women workers in reporting these crimes? Can you please share with us?
Sí, buenos
Ciela.
días, muchas gracias por el espacio. Nosotros acá en Honduras, como la Red contra la Violencia Antisindical, hasta la fecha no hemos documentado pues femicidio, pero sí tenemos registros de mujeres sindicalistas que son víctimas de violencia antisindical y violencia de género. Desde el contexto de defender derechos laborales, las coloca en un riesgo permanente, ya que reciben ataques y amenazas no solo en su contra, sino también dentro de su entorno familiar. Otras compañeras se han enfrentado a la desintegración familiar. Una de las consecuencias de ello es la migración. Generalmente huyen en busca de condiciones seguras, obteniendo con ello la estigmatización social. Se puede observar también el empoderamiento de las mujeres sindicalistas que ha generado un aumento en los ataques y amenazas a su integridad y dignidad. Durante los últimos años se ha podido constatar que si bien la violencia antisindical se practica en hombres y mujeres por igual, pero existen diferencias. A nosotros las mujeres, la mayor parte de casos se da al interior del trabajo, también en redes sociales y nuestro entorno familiar. Mas, sin embargo, a los hombres siempre se hace en actos públicos. Algunas de las amenazas de muerte que se hacen a través en contra de las madres e hijos, siempre nos atacan a las mujeres, siempre amenazando a nuestras madres y a nuestros hijos, y es algo que nos toca en nuestra debilidad. También constantemente estamos enfrentando carácter machistas cargados de contenido sexual. En la mayoría de los casos los victimarios son hombres. De los hechos que tenemos individualizados de violencia en el 2019, 40% fueron en contra de mujeres. A pesar del avance de la participación de las mujeres, es necesario señalar que continuamos afrontando situaciones de exclusión y discriminación por razones de género, situación que no es exclusiva a los hogares, centros de trabajo, sino también a nuestras organizaciones sindicales. Según datos del Centro de Derechos de la Mujer, CDM, en el 2020 y 2021, en tiempos de pandemia, más de 278 muertes violentas fueron en contra de mujeres y que fueron asesinadas con armas de fuego y cortopunzantes. Las causas de alto nivel de femicidios en Honduras son variadas, aunque una de las principales es la impunidad, debido a que el 90% de los asesinatos no son investigados, por lo que los asesinos continúan operando los delitos y estos quedan en la impunidad. Tenemos grandes retos y desafíos, y uno de ellos es la falta de legitimidad e inoperancia del sistema judicial, temor a ser revictimizadas y también temor a no tener pruebas en caso del acoso sexual.
Thank you so much for highlighting that. It's really an honor to hear that. And now to my sister, Ayesha. Ayesha, according to UNODC, female sex workers have the highest homicide victimization rate of any group of women studied, and are 18 times more likely to be killed than women in other professions. Tell me, what are the unique challenges faced by sex workers, and what are the possible reasons behind the highlighted impunity of these killings?
Okay, thank you. नमस्ते सबको. जैसे कि प्रश्न के अनुसार में इस तरह से है कि सेक्स वर्कर के साथ में बहुत शोषण होता है, हर रोज होता है, जैसे कि फिजिकली होता है, ऑनलाइन के माध्यम से हो रहा है, और हैरेसमेंट भी बहुत होता है, क्योंकि सेक्स वर्कर्स को जो कि है इक्वल सिटीजनशिप जो है नहीं माना जाता है, जिसके सारे देशवासियों और कामगारों जैसे प्रोटेक्शन और राइट्स नहीं मिलने चाहिए, जिस तरह से मिलनी चाहिए उस तरह से नहीं मिलती है। और सेक्स वर्कर्स के बीच में जो है ट्रांस वुमेन है, माइग्रेंट सेक्स है, और भी ज्यादा रिस्क में होते हैं, क्योंकि वो भी और भी ज्यादा वनरेबल होते हैं और उनके पास ठीक से डॉक्यूमेंटेशन नहीं होती। सेक्स वर्कर्स अपराधी होने और शिकार होने के बीच में की जगह में मौजूद है। हम मीडिया रिप्रेजेंटेशन और ज्यादा स्टिग्मेटाइज होते हैं, बुरे कानून और जनामत के माध्यम से इतना कलंक किया जाता है हमें कि हमेशा ही सेक्स वर्कर्स के खिलाफ हिंसा पर कोई भी एक्शन भी नहीं लिया जाता है। जैसे कि सेक्स वर्कर्स होने के नाते हम हिंसा की मांग कर रहे हैं, हिंसा की खिलाफ मांग करते हैं। सेक्स वर्कर संभाविक रूप से हिंसक नहीं है, लेकिन हमारे कार्यस्थलों को ग्राहकों को राज्य के अभिनीति और नागरिक समाज द्वारा असुरक्षित बनाया दिया जाता है, जो मानते हैं कि वे अंतरिक्षिक गतिशीलता और आजीविका के हमारे अधिकारों को उल्लंघन करके समाज की नैतिक संगति को बनाए रहे दें। Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I want to turn to Jiva. Jiva, you are the General Secretary of Tamil Nadu Textiles and Common Labor Union. And it has come to our realization that government workers are increasingly subjected to economic exploitation and gender-based violence in global supply chains. You have worked as a garment worker and a trade union activist. What are the unique challenges faced by garment workers which make them vulnerable to lethal violence?
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். என் பேர் ஜீவா. நான் தமிழ்நாடு பஞ்சாலை மற்றும் பொது தொழிலாளர் சங்கத்துல செயலாளரா இருக்கேன். நான் ஒரு தலித் சமூகத்தை சேர்ந்த பெண் தொழிலாளி. என்னோட பிரச்சனை இவ்வளவு பெரிய அமைப்புல, எங்களோட பிரச்சனை இவ்வளவு பெரிய அமைப்புல பேச வாய்ப்பு கொடுத்ததுக்கு நன்றி. ஆடை உற்பத்தி துறையில வேலை செய்யற பெண் தொழிலாளர்களுக்கான இருக்க பாலியல் ரீதியான பிரச்சனை ஒன்றும் தனிப்பட்ட பிரச்சனை கிடையாது. இது உலகளவிய வர்த்தகத்துல பேஷன் பிராண்டுகள் உருவாக்குன ஒரு உற்பத்தி மாடல் தாங்கிறத எங்களை போல தலித் பெண்களுக்கான பாலியல் ரீதியான பிரச்சனைகள் அதிக அளவுல ஆளாக்கப்படுகிறதுங்கிறத இந்த இடத்துல நான் பதிவு பண்ணிக்கிறேன். அது மட்டும் இல்லாம எங்களை போல தலித் பெண் தொழிலாளரை முன்னேற்றதுக்கு பதிலா அவங்க எங்களோட உழைப்பையும் எங்களோட பாலியல் ரீதியான பிரச்சனைகளை, பாலியல் ரீதியான துன்புறுத்தல்களுக்கு ஆகிய இதுகளுக்கு கார்மெண்ட்ஸும் பிராண்டுகளும் எங்களை அதிக அளவுல சுரண்டப்படுறாங்க. தொழிற்சாலைகளை நீங்க எங்க எடுத்துக்கிட்டாலும் எங்களை போல ஒடுக்கப்பட்ட பெண் தொழிலாளர்கள், அதுவும் தலித் சமூகத்தை சேர்ந்த பெண்கள் தாங்க அதிக அளவுல வேலை பாக்குறாங்க. அப்படி அதிக அளவுல வேலை பாக்குற இடத்துல ஆண்கள் அதிக அளவுல வேலை பார்க்குற இடத்துல ஆண் சூப்பர்வைசர் தான், அதுவும் உயர் ஜாதியை சேர்ந்த சூப்பர்வைசர்கள் தான் உயர் பதவிகள்ல இருக்காங்க. இதுதாங்க அவங்களோட அதிகார திமிரை எங்களை போல இல்லாத ஒடுக்கப்பட்ட பெண் தொழிலாளர்களை பாலியல் ரீதியான அதிக அளவுல பாதிக்கப்பட இந்த கம்பெனியும் தொழிற்சங்கமும் காரணமா இருக்கு. தொழிலாளர் நாங்க ஒண்ணு சேர்ந்து இது போல வன்முறைகள்ல இருந்து எங்களை பாதுகாக்கிறதுக்கு இருக்கிறதுக்கு தயக்கமும் இது ஒரு பெரிய காரணமா இருக்கு. அது மட்டும் இல்லாம எங்களோட சம்பள பிரச்சனைகளையும் சரி, எங்களோட தொழிலாளரோட பிரச்சனைகளையும் சரி, எங்களோட தொழிலாளருக்கான அமைப்புல பேசுறதுக்கான வாய்ப்புகளை அவங்க எடுத்துக்காதனாலதான், அவங்களோட அஜாக்கிரதையானால எங்களுக்கான இருக்க இதோட பிரச்சனை என்னன்னு கேட்டீங்கன்னா, எங்களுக்கான போதுமான கூலியும் கிடையாது. எங்களோட வேலைக்கான உறுதியையும் இந்த பிராண்ட் உறுதி செய்யறதுக்கான வேலை இந்த பிராண்டோட மெத்தனமும் இதெல்லாம் சேர்ந்து பாலியல் ரீதியான பிரச்சனைகளையும் சரி, எங்களை பல விதமான சுரண்டல்களுக்கு எங்களை ரொம்பவே தள்ளப்படுது. அது மட்டும் இல்லாம இந்த ஜிபி பிரச்சனைகள்ல அது மட்டும் இல்லாம இதோட இன்னமும் இதோட பிரச்சனைகள்ல இருந்து நியாயமான நேர்மையான இதோட இல்லாம இந்த காரணங்களுக்காக இப்ப என்னோட சகோதரிகள் இந்த தமிழ்நாட்டை பலவிதமான பிரச்சனைகளுக்கும் சுரண்டல்களுக்கும் ஆளாகப்படுறாங்க. இதுல முக்கியமா குறிப்பா சொல்லணும்னா கட்டாயப்படுத்தி மாத்திரை கொடுக்கறது, அவர்களை தகாத வார்த்தையில திட்டுறது, கட்டாயப்படுத்தி ஓட்டி பாக்குறது, இதெல்லாம் கூட பாலியல் துன்புறதுக்கு ஈஸியா அந்த கம்பெனியும் பிராண்டும் எங்களை ஈஸியா தள்ளப்படுகிறது.
Thank you. Thank you. And that really tells us that there is need to call for ratification of Convention 190 and its recommendation 206, so that matters that pertain violence and harassment can be eliminated in the world of work, so that women can get their right and work in a workplace that is free from violence and harassment. Thank you very much for sharing these challenges with us. And now I want to get to my sister Fumi. Sister Fumi, based on the nature of work, what are some of the challenges faced by maritime women workers and in general by women workers in the transportation sector, which can make them vulnerable to lethal violence? Because I know transportation sector is normally male dominated, and so can you please share with us?
Thank you very much, sister. According to ILO 2013 policy brief on women in transport sector, violence against transport workers is one of the most important factors limiting the attraction of transport jobs for women and breaking the retention of those who are employed in the transport sector. Transport is a male-dominated sector, and women are underrepresented in the sector, but overrepresented in low-paying, precarious, informal jobs. Lack of job security leads to increased risk of violence and harassment against women. Women face everyday challenges of sexual harassment, sexual coercion, physical and mental violence. We hear similar experiences and challenges from sisters across transport. Women transport workers face violence and harassment in their workplace. In our experience, women workers are often asked out, invited to spend alone time by the boss. And if women reject it, there are consequences. They are denied work, discriminated against. They are denied overtime earnings when they reject the sexual favor. They are denied promotions for years. They are denied allowances if they don't give in and refuse the demand of sexual favor. This attitude from management also contributes to creating the same culture with male co-workers. They feel they can get away with anything. Women transport workers are often in customers-facing roles, are more at risk from violence at work. For example, workers who handle cash, taxi drivers, e.g., those who deal with frustrated customers, e.g., delayed passengers or drunk customers, and those who work alone at night or in geographically isolated places will all find themselves at risk. Predictable, preventable, and frequent violence against transport workers is a growing problem. To quote a woman bus rapid transport ticket seller from Colombia, from ITF study conducted in 2018, for example, on a public holiday, I arrived half an hour late because there were no taxis available that day, and they summoned me to a disciplinary process. Now, I've had to ride my bike at 3 a.m. in a city where they kill you for a cell phone. I must go out and risk my life to try to get to my job quickly. Lastly, pandemic crisis has increased the incidence and intensity of violence and harassment against women transport workers. According to a road transport woman in Nigeria, she had issues of rape because of the pandemic, especially workers who were working late at night, had to go on empty roads, had to find their way. We have had cases where people were robbed, especially women. Their tires were slashed, and some were even raped. So these are some of the challenges we are battling with. And these impacts are long-term, as we are already seeing. When it comes back, men came on board and women were told to stay at home. Just
I think your time is, yeah.
Oh, okay. Finally, we're asked, should I just round it up? We are asked by the boss, please allow us to come back. And we have to feed our children.
Can you just wrap up in a second? Please, my sister.
Okay, no. Use what you have to get what you want. That is what we face in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And as I hear from all speakers today, it then calls for all of us to encourage to publicize the Femicide petition and make sure that it is signed, because we are realizing that these things are true and they are in fact issues that we need to attend to. And it is time to really act and work together to make C190 a reality and to join the call for collective action globally and locally. So we need to ask governments today to ratify this convention, but we need to also ask all of us to make sure that we sign the Femicide petition and make sure that it's up and it's running. So let me go to our next speaker. I want to speak to Anne now. Anne, you are the founding chairperson of Sandigan, Kuwait, and Sandigan Kuwait Domestic Workers Association. And I want you to help us in understanding, because there are certain groups of workers that are more at risk of lethal violence than others, such as the migrant domestic workers, whose workplaces are the employers' homes. They work in the employers' homes. And now, how has COVID-19 impacted domestic workers? Has it led to rise in gender-based violence and femicides among the constituency, or how has it been? My sister, can you please share with us this?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And indeed, women are the most vulnerable gender when we talk about gender-based violence. In our experience in Sandigan, Kuwait, majority of the cases we encountered are all with women, from sexual harassment, physical, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, and other forms of abuse. However, only few women are able to file a complaint due to several reasons. And the situation of migrant domestic workers worsened during this pandemic, especially in 2020. Most of the domestic workers are overworked since employers are also at home. All government agencies, including some of the embassies, are closed. The domestic workers have no choice but to stick with the situation no matter how bad it is. The travel restriction becomes a huge consideration in asserting the rights of the domestic workers. Many domestic workers have been infected by coronavirus. Since they are in the frontliners of each home, we are the frontliners. They are the one who is assigned to go to the market, nurses the sick, be the teacher, prepared food for their employer. Even if the worker got infected still she is obliged to take care of the employer's family and continue serving the employer while fighting for her life. Domestic worker is not a priority in terms of hospital services and healthcare. They are the least who are being accommodated. Despite of all the services and the work tasks, the domestic worker need to double the work capacity and even subjected to many harassment and abuses. If abuses become severe, the employer confiscates the worker's mobile phone. Others are brought to another country and to continuously experience severe abuses, physical disabilities, or even death. Note that the domestic worker sector comprises of male and female domestic workers. It is so significant that harassment and abuse is, of course, mostly to women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And indeed, that is true. The domestic workers have continued to suffer in the hands of their own bosses, who have also been perpetrators of violence and harassment. And I want to tell you that Convention 190 sisters here provide protection for this kind of workers, and it also provides protection for the people who are undergoing violence and harassment. And therefore, I would like to once again urge all of us to sign this petition, and also to urge our governments to ratify Convention 190 and its recommendation 206, because it will help curb violence and harassment at workplaces and in the world of work. And so I am on you, Chantal. Chantal, you are an independent journalist in Mexico. In the year 2021, the number of female journalists killed while in the field doubled since 2020 and were at 9% of all media-related casualties. The highest percentage since 2017, which was realized, and that we can say it was the highest. So tell me, what are the unique challenges faced by women journalists? And you can as well mention something in regards to violence that they undergo. Take the floor. Chantal?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
Please. Go
Okay.
ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this space. Well, women journalists are subjected to many of the violence that you already mentioned, such as intimidation, sexual harassment in the newsroom and in the field, psychological violence, online harassment. And women journalists are often also burdened by their own experience of gender violence. They also face the same risk as other women, the same risk as our male colleagues, and also the risk that impacts to be a female journalist, right? In Mexico, there's a double risk. So Mexico has an average of 10 to 11 femicides per day, and also has one of the highest numbers when it comes to the killings of journalists and human rights defenders, right? So that's just like the big panorama. In the day-to-day, you know, while working, we also have job instability and low wages that put us in a more vulnerable situation. In Mexico, there are laws, there are measures to protect journalists, but they are not being implemented, such as in the case of Honduras, the impunity rate is super high. Often authorities do not investigate, you know, the threats that we face as female journalists, and obviously there's almost no prosecution. So this leaves us in a more, this put us at higher risk while doing our work. Also, one of the other things is the repercussions of this, right? Just in this year, in the first 2 months in Mexico, 5 journalists were killed, right? So this is, I think this year has been different in the sense that it has made us question which stories we're gonna continue pursuing despite of the risk that these stories implies, right? So one of the repercussions is that there's self-censoring, or maybe female journalists are withdrawing from online spaces, and obviously this damages the critical role of journalism in any society, right? So I think in general, right now, the climate in Mexico is very unstable. There are so many risks coming from being a journalist, from being a woman, and there's no response from the government, right? So yes, just so to wrap up, I think women journalists, in Mexico, obviously every journalist is at risk, but women journalists face double risk just for being a woman and also being a journalist in a country like Mexico. Thank you.
Yeah, it is true. And it is not only in Mexico. I can tell you all over the world, women journalists are facing a lot of violence and harassment in their places of work. And yeah, I want to call upon our participants to really, for those of you who have not signed the Femicide petition, kindly let us sign the Femicide petition. It has been shared in our chat box, and we can sign it, and we can make sure that we get as many signatures as possible for this petition. It is key for us, and I want to encourage you. It has also come very clearly that there is a lot of femicide victimization rates all over the world. Gender-based violence all over the world is really, it's one thing. And this is why I also encourage us to encourage our governments to ratify Convention 190 and its recommendation 260, so that we can have a world of work free from gender-based violence, free from homicide victimization, you know, free from violence that the domestic workers undergo at their places of work. It is key and it is recommended. So if you have questions, any questions, please feel free to share your questions in the chat box and you will get the answers. I will also get time to read a few comments that are at the chat box, and it is time that you can still ask your questions and answers in the chat box, even as we now want to take the second round before we can open the floor for some panel, for some discussions. And I want to just go the same system that I went in the first round, starting by our first speaker, who is our sister, Isiela. I want to ask you a second question, my sister. In this time round, what is actually the role that trade unions play in addressing gender-based violence and femicides amongst women workers, if you can share with us? And how is ILO Convention 190 relevant to addressing this, since you have been very active in, and you are actively involved in the negotiations of ILO convention leading to the promulgation of Convention 190 that was adopted in 2019. Isiela, you have the floor.
Gracias. Bueno. Perdón. Para nosotros como red de mujeres sindicalistas acá en Honduras, la violencia de género es una de las violaciones de derechos humanos más frecuentes y representa uno de los principales obstáculos para lograr la igualdad de género. Afecta a miles de trabajadores y trabajadoras en todos los sectores y ocupaciones, causando daños físicos, psicológicos y sociales y económicos. Además, no solo afecta a las víctimas directas, es decir, a las personas violentadas, sino que tiene un efecto multiplicador porque la colectividad se ve de esa forma amenazada e intimidada. ¿Qué estamos haciendo como mujeres acá en Honduras? Bueno, a través de la red estamos incorporando un enfoque de género al análisis de represión antisindical y la violencia de género en el trabajo, lo cual podría contribuir a visibilizar la violencia diferenciada que sufren las mujeres. También estamos haciendo a nivel nacional en diferentes regiones procesos de formación en grupos mixtos sobre el contenido y del convenio 190 y todo el proceso que ha conllevado pues la aprobación de este mismo convenio, y ahora pues pidiendo la ratificación al gobierno de Honduras, de lo cual en este momento no se ha podido lograr. También estamos haciendo solo grupos de hombres formándose en nuevas masculinidades y aportando a contrarrestar la violencia de género. Ha sido algo muy novedoso nosotros acá en Honduras, porque como todas sabemos, el mayor reproductor de la violencia de género ha sido el hombre, y eso nos ha ayudado muchísimo pues a avanzar un poquito, porque se ha visto que nosotros como mujeres estamos más vulnerables, igual que la comunidad LGTBI. También desde el año 2019 que fue aprobado el convenio 190 a través de la red contra la violencia antisindical con el apoyo del Centro de Solidaridad, las confederaciones, las federaciones, las organizaciones de mujeres, la comunidad LGTBI, nos hemos unido para venir desarrollando campañas a fin de proponer contratos colectivos de trabajo más democráticos, a manera de que en estos contratos colectivos pues, hayan cláusulas con enfoque de género. Esto es la negociación que se hace entre empleadores y obreros. También trabajando internamente en nuestros estatutos internos, a manera de que también haya el enfoque de género en nuestros artículos, ya que también internamente en las organizaciones sindicales pues se da bastante la violencia de género. También todas estas propuestas que hemos hecho con la participación de hombres y mujeres y la comunidad LGTBI en igualdad de condiciones. Además, hemos emprendido una cruzada dentro de una campaña sindical mundial sobre el convenio 190, donde hemos formado varias comisiones para solicitar al Poder Ejecutivo y al Poder Judicial pues que este convenio sea ratificado. Recientemente estuvimos el 8 de marzo de este año, estuvimos en el Congreso Nacional, un grupo de mujeres sindicalistas, lideresas en el movimiento sindical hondureño, exigiéndole pues a lo que es el Poder Legislativo que este convenio se pueda ratificar. Tuvimos una muy buena aceptación por compañeras diputadas que están dispuestas también a apoyar al convenio porque les beneficia a ellos por la violencia política que hay dentro de nuestro país. Hemos elaborado cualquier cantidad de espacios publicitarios en medios televisivos, medios radiales y también medios en redes sociales, donde estamos pidiéndole al gobierno de Honduras que este convenio sea ratificado. Lamentablemente en estos años atrás no se pudo lograr, pero ahora con el cambio de gobierno, con una nueva presidenta mujer, primera mujer presidenta en Honduras, lo hemos logrado y tenemos esa esperanza que este convenio de 190 que viene a erradicar la violencia y de acoso de género, pues sea ratificado en este periodo con Xiomara en el poder.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My sister Ayesh, based on your advocacy work in the South Asian region, how can governments and civil society organizations address femicides among female sex workers? Can you please tell us this?
जैसे कि मानव अधिकार के रक्षकों के 2020 के एक अध्ययन के अनुसार में सेक्स वर्कर्स दुनिया में सबसे अधिक रिस्क मानव अधिकार रक्षक है। सबसे पहले सरकार को सेक्स वर्क के अपराध से मुक्ति करने की जरूरत है। सेक्स वर्कर्स को अपराध घोषित सुरक्षा को प्राथमिकता नहीं दी जा सकती है। यदि सेक्स वर्क को अपराध से मुक्त कर दिया जाता है और देश के सम्मान नागरिक के रूप में माना जाता है, तो वे कार्यस्थल सुरक्षा प्राप्त कर सकते हैं और व्यावसायिक खतरों के लिए मददगार मांग कर सकते हैं, जो कि कामकाजी महिलाओं के खिलाफ स्त्री विरोधी हम लोग के साथ में आते हैं। जब हम सवाल करते हैं कि सेक्स वर्कर्स को कि आसान लक्ष्य क्यों माना जाता है, तो पुलिस की रणनीति की भी जांच की जानी चाहिए, जो उनके खिलाफ अपराधियों की रिपोर्ट नहीं करेंगे। ये स्पष्ट है, सड़क और घर के अंदर में सेक्स वर्कर्स दोनों के लिए परिवर्तन नेतृत्व वाली पुलिसिंग अपराध की रिपोर्ट करने के लिए और प्राप्त सुविधा प्रदान करने के वाले कानून में बाधा उत्पन्न करती है। कानूनी सुधार से के बिना जो प्रोस्टिट्यूशन जो गलत है या सेक्स वर्क गलत है ऐसे बोलते हैं कि साधारण विचारधारा से आगे बढ़ता है। और अभी के स्थिति के अनुसार में सेक्स वर्क जो श्रम है कि व्यवहारिक तो को संबंधित करने वाले कानूनी और नीतिगत ढांचे की ओर में ऐसी त्रासदी होती रहेगी। इनके अलावा सेक्स वर्कर्स के लिए साथी द्वारा बनाए गए सामूहिक क्षमता को सरकारी और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय फीडिंग संगठनों के फीडिंग और समर्थन के माध्यम से बढ़ाने की जरूरत है। हम अपने वास्तविकता को सबसे अच्छी तरह जानते हैं और इसका समाधान जानते हैं। कानूनी सुधार के साथ साथ इन परिवर्तनों को करने के लिए भी हमें समर्थन की आवश्यकता है। थैंक यू।
Hope you are around. I want you to help me in responding, because I saw a report in 2016 by Interparliamentary Union documented how women parliamentarians are subjected to physical, sexual, and psychological violence. More than 40% of female MPs interviewed by IPU stated that they had received threats of death, rape, beatings, or abduction while serving their terms, which can culminate in femicides if unaddressed. Based on your work as a former minister, what are the challenges faced by women parliamentarians? Because this is happening globally, not only in where you are, but it has been globally. So can you please, Miriam, share with us this?
Of course. Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Hello, everybody. Bonjour, Anin, salam alaikum. What an honor it is to be part of this conversation with my esteemed colleagues. I'm an Afghan Canadian, so I bring a lot of privileges as a Canadian to this conversation. Unlike my Afghan sisters, members of parliament who just a few months ago were doing incredible work, have now been displaced, their families are under threat, and they're all over the world waiting for their next beginning. So I wanted to acknowledge that privilege to begin. To answer your question, I'd say there are three main challenges that arise from the violence that is, targeting and focusing specifically on women with power. And the more intersectionalities, of course, the tougher it gets, the more violence there is, and the more reason there is to be fearful. As my colleague Isela said, when there are more of us, women at decision-making tables, this violence is a backlash. It is a response to more of us in those spaces. And certainly there are more of us than ever before in decision-making tables in Canada. And I do want to couch this in, I just had a really painful election where I lost, but I would still highly recommend entering politics to anyone. There are ways to be prepared. There are ways to surround yourself with allies, but I would still highly recommend it. So I'll put that out there, and then three problems. Problem number one, when women like Iqra Khalid get up in the House of Commons and say, hey, we should study Islamophobia as a term and decide as Canadian Parliament what to do about it. She is met with response, hate, online fundraising efforts from opposition, all meant to break her down and change her mind about putting forward a motion to study the term Islamophobia. When Catherine McKenna, our former climate minister, is out there pushing to put a price on pollution and to make sure that everyone in Canada does their part, but also Canada does its part around the world, and her office is defaced, her social media is the target of all sorts of violence, that sends a message. So problem one, if the most powerful women amongst us are disrespected, if we are violated and harassed, if the most powerful are in this position, then how difficult it must be for the most vulnerable in our society. Two, representation matters. And as we start to come out of the pandemic and deal with the carnage that it's left behind, our voices at the table make a difference. I read somewhere that about 80% of those on the front lines of the fight against the pandemic have been women. There's never been more at stake for us. We can build back better, but not if we're not at the table. And then the third problem that this creates, and Ardra and Nishi and the team are working on their December 6th campaign. December 6th in Montreal, a gunman walks into a classroom and opens fire on women studying to be engineers. Our engineering numbers in Canada have not recovered since the late 1980s. So when little girls like my nieces see what happens to people like me and other women with power, when they step up and say, let us lead, they say, why would we bother raising our hand and being part of the change? So I'd say that's the third problem.
So Miriam, in your opinion, what are the actions and solutions to address gender-based violence and killings of women parliamentarians?
Well, first of all, having conversations like this matters. It turns out no matter how privileged we are, whether in the global South or the global North, we as women with power and influence are experiencing a greater amount of violence online and in person. I think there's an opportunity to rally around it, whether it's through ILO, whether it's through the great work that Interparliamentary Union and folks like Patty Torsney do, or the women of the world, as we do here at the Commission on the Status of Women. Let's never forget that we run so we get things done in politics. So all of us women, whether we're journalists, whether we're politicians, whether we're business women, labor leaders, let's talk about the positive side of the work, the impact we get to have, as well as the struggle. If we do not talk about why we choose to do this work, we run the risk of losing future leaders, aspiring leaders. In Canada, we're talking about regulating social media platforms. And that's something that the women of the world, particularly civil society, can come together and with one voice push for this. Because if the violence continues on social media, it will inevitably spill out into our communities, into our workplaces. The tech sector as a whole doesn't include too many women designing the algorithms, writing the algorithms, designing the software, marketing it. And if we're not in those rooms, then these devices, these technologies will not be created to keep us safe and to amplify our voices. For women thinking about running, be prepared. Go into these jobs with your eyes wide open. There are opportunities for you to protect yourself, depending on how privileged you are, but for our allies. For those who say they support us and want to see us doing well, who look at their daughters and say, I want my daughter in a position like that. Well, we need you to rise, particularly the men in our families and in our communities. If you see something horrible said about a woman leading, whether you agree with her politics or not, call it out. Post something in direct contradiction to the trolls and the haters. Don't let that woman who's put her neck out, who's sticking her neck out, take that heat on her own. Violence against women is a reflection of how society sees and values us in the first place. And it's time, particularly for our brothers, to rise and call out this stuff. Otherwise, the decisions that are going to be made on our behalf are not going to reflect the realities and the innovations that women bring to the decision-making tables around the world.
Thank you. Very good recommendations. And I hope all of us have at least captured this. This can really help us going forward. So I have a question for Jiva. Jiva, you have been actively involved with the Justice for GSR campaigns through TTCU. Could you please tell us more about this campaign and how it aims to address femicides among garment workers?
ஜெயஸ்ரீ கதிர்வேல் வந்து ஒரு கார்மெண்ட்ஸ் தொழிலாளி, என்னோட ரத்த சொந்தமும் கூட. அவ வந்து எங்க ஊர்ல இருந்து தான், அவ எங்க சங்கத்துல ஒரு உறுப்பினரா வேற இருக்கா. எங்க ஊர்ல இருந்து தான் அவ கார்மெண்ட்ஸ் வேலைக்கு போய்கிட்டு இருந்தா. அவளை வந்து ஜனவரி 1ஆம் தேதி 2021ல அவளோட சூப்பர்வைசர், உயர் ஜாதியை சேர்ந்த சூப்பர்வைசரால ரேப் பண்ணி கொடூரமான முறையில கொலை செய்யப்பட்டாள். நான் வந்து முதல்ல சொல்லியது போலவே இந்த மாதிரி கார்மெண்ட்ஸ் தொழிலாளர்ல கம்பெனியில வேலை செய்யற தலித் பெண் தொழிலாளர்கள் போன்ற பாலியல் கொடுமைக்கு ஆளாகப்படுவதற்கு ஆச்சரியம் ஒண்ணும் இல்லைங்க. ஏன்னா இது போன்ற பல மரணங்களை வந்து நாங்க பார்த்திருக்கோம். ஆனா தொழிற்சாலையில வந்து வர்த்தகம் செய்யற பிராண்டுகளை எங்களால கண்டுபிடிக்க முடியல. ஆனா ஜெயஸ்ரீயோட கொலை செய்யப்பட்டதுக்கான ஒரு கம்பெனியோட பிராண்ட் எங்களால சீக்கிரம் அடையாளம் கண்டுபிடிக்க முடிஞ்சிச்சு. ஜெயஸ்ரீ இறந்ததுக்கு அப்புறம் அவளோட வேலை செய்த கம்பெனில வந்து 25 பெண்கள் வந்து எங்க கம்பெனில ஜிபிவி பிரச்சனை இருக்குதுங்கிறத வந்து எங்கள்கிட்ட வந்து சொன்னாங்க. இதை வந்து உடனே நாங்க வந்து AFWA GLJ-ங்கிற ஒரு இவரோட சேர்ந்து ஜெயஸ்ரீக்கான நீதிக்கான பிரச்சாரத்தை வந்து நாங்க ஆரம்பிச்சோம். முதல் கோரிக்கையா வந்து நாங்க ஜெயஸ்ரீயோட குடும்பத்துக்கு நியாயமான இழப்பீடு கொடுக்கணும்னு கேட்டுக்கிட்டோம். இந்தியாவுல இது போல வந்து பாலியல் வன்முறைகள் வந்து நடக்காம இருக்க வேலை செய்யணுங்கிறதுக்காக கம்பெனி, பிராண்டு, தொழிற்சங்கம் இது 3 சேர்ந்து ஒரு ஒப்பந்தத்துல கையெழுத்திட்டு இது போல பாலியல் ரீதியான பிரச்சனைகள் எங்கேயும் இருக்கக்கூடாதுங்கிறதுக்காக வன்முறைகள் கண்காணிக்க சரி செய்யவும் இந்த கோரிக்கைகளை முன்வைத்து எங்கள் பிரச்சனைகளை வந்து நாங்க வந்து பிரச்சாரத்தை ஆரம்பிச்சோம். உலகம் முழுவதும் நாங்க இந்த பிரச்சாரத்தை நடத்தினப்ப எங்களுக்கு உலக பல நாடுகள்ல வந்து எங்களுக்கு பெரிய அளவுல வந்து இதுக்கு ஆதரவு கிடைச்சிச்சு. ஆதரவு கிடைச்சதும் இல்லாம ஜெயஸ்ரீயோட குடும்பத்துக்கு வந்து ஒரு நல்ல இழப்பீடு எங்களால வாங்கி கொடுக்க முடிஞ்சுச்சு. இந்த GBVH பிரச்சனைகளை தடுக்கிறதுக்கான ஒப்பந்தம் பேச்சுவார்த்தைகளோட கட்டத்துல முடிவுல இருக்கும். இந்த ஒப்பந்தத்துக்கான ஒரு C190ங்கிற ஒரு உள்ளடக்கிய ஒரு GBVH குறித்து சிறந்த கல்வி திட்டங்களுடைய பயிற்சிகளை தொழிற்சாலைகளை எல்லா பணியாளர்களுக்கும் வந்து கொடுக்கணும்னு கேட்டுக்கிட்டோம். GBVH பிரச்சனை வந்து தொழிலாளர்களே முன் வந்து இதை வந்து பாதிப்பு புகார் அளித்து அதனால அவர்களுக்கு வேலை போகாத ஒரு சூழலையும் இதனால அவங்க பழிவாங்க எந்த ஒரு விதத்திலையும் பழிவாங்கும் எண்ணத்தோட இல்லாம செய்யறதையும் இந்த ஒப்பந்தம் கையெழுத்தான அனைத்து விதமான GBVH பிரச்சனைகளும் குறிப்பா தலித் பெண் தொழிலாளர்களுக்காக பாலியல் ரீதியான தலித் பெண்கள் தொழிலாளர்களுக்கான பாலியல் ரீதியான கொலை செய்யப்படுவது இது போன்ற வேலை உலகத்திலிருந்து ஒழித்து போவதற்கு ஒரு முதல் படியாகவும் இருக்க வேண்டுங்கிறத நாங்க இந்த இடத்துல சொல்லிக்கிறோம். நன்றி.
Thank you. And I would add by saying that Convention 190 deals with gender-based violence from all kinds of perspectives, and it recognizes and has an inclusive, integrated, and gender-responsive approach which is required, which tackles underlying cases of risk factors, including gender stereotypes and multiple intersecting forms of discrimination. So I think when we call for ratification of this convention, it will also help in the same. And now to Fami. Fami, you shared with us a lot of challenges that face maritime workers in your first round. And now I want to ask you, women workers, both formal and informal sectors, face different forms of lethal violence during their commute to work. This is also always perpetuated by either employers or co-workers, and sometimes by third party or even intimate partners. how can trade unions use the tool of ILO Convention 190 and its recommendation 206 to bring about a change in workplace policies?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, the adoption of C190 is groundbreaking for transport workers. Violence and harassment is defined as a range of behaviors and practices. This is important for transport workers because the form of violence and harassment they frequently face are generally dismissed and normalized as less extreme form of intimidation and harassment. Commute to and from work is recognized in C190, which is crucial for transport workers because many transport workers irregular and unsociable hours when transport to travel to and from work is limited or not operating. Employers rarely provide safe and accessible transport to and from work where needed, meaning workers often face violence and harassment on their commute to and from work. The convention acknowledges and includes third-party violence, including from customers, passengers, members of the public, authorities, and vehicle owners. This is significant for transport workers, as many transport workers are in workplaces where their work circumstances expose them to increased risk of violence from third parties, such as on buses, trains, planes, and taxis. With the adoption of C190, trade unions have a unique opportunity to address and prevent violence and harassment in the world of work. This work can have a greater impact in trade unions' work with other key stakeholders to strengthen action and around violence and harassment at work. Trade unions can raise awareness of C190 and R206 and its importance in tackling violence and harassment at work. Negotiate C190 and R206 language into collective agreements and policy structures, and lobby governments to effectively implement the convention. Addressing violence and harassment in the work of work is more relevant now than ever. C190 is crucial for protecting workers against violence and harassment during this crisis and recovery. It's crucial that we recognize potential allies, work together to strengthen our national, regional campaigns to build awareness, to build support, negotiate better collective bargaining agreements with employers, and collectively lobby governments for ratification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fami, for explaining that and even explaining that the definition of violence and harassment is well in C190. And I also want to let my fellow sisters know that also the definition of gender-based violence in the world of work is defined in C190, and it has a strong enforcement remedies that are provided for victims of gender-based violence and harassment. And it is indeed a wonderful tool that we can use even in our national policies. Now I have a question for Anne. Anne, based on your work with the Sangram Kuwait, what are some of the ways in which workers can collectively organize to address femicides among migrant workers, including domestic workers, and especially in the absence of legal and social protection in countries of destination? Because we've had a lot of cases in regards to this, and I would like you to really help us in understanding what we can do at this point.
Yes. Okay. Sandigan Kuwait Domestic Workers Association and Ethiopian Domestic Workers Association are comprises of female domestic workers, and domestic workers who reach out to Sandigan Kuwait are mostly women. Organized domestic worker sector by nationality is one of the key that unlocks awareness in education. The Sandigan Kuwait Domestic Workers Association, Ethiopian Domestic Workers Association serves as a model to organize other domestic workers in West African countries and other nationals that have existing domestic workers in Kuwait, which is more vulnerable. Through the SKDWA and AFWA's training on different domestic workers issues like GBV, organizing domestic workers is very, very challenging. We start to organize them by nationality and of commonalities of custom, language, cultural identity by region. Determining the population of the migrant domestic workers is very important as well. Cultural diversity and social practices should be taken into account. Know their most common day off and find point of entry to bind them in together. Develop a program that entice and motivate the employer for the worker allowed to attend the programs. For example, Arabic language training, inserting the domestic workers law, welfare and rights education that benefits the employer and the worker. Conduct activities that benefits the worker parallel to current issues or based on studies mapping surveys of Sandigan Kuwait had. Build protection mechanism while organizing. Work with local embassies by determining the current protection mechanism of the country of origin, which is very important. Connect existing local laws that regulates the movement of the migrant domestic workers. Establish hotlines and programs and that benefits the domestic workers. Hotlines, psychosocial services, understanding and asserting the rights, and involving the domestic worker sector in all kinds of forums that can enhance and encourage the domestic worker in organizing and be involved in the movement in legal perspective. Organizing domestic worker is always challenging. It's always challenging, especially here in Arab countries due to kafala system, lack of freedom of movement, and of freedom of association that hinders organizing the most vulnerable sector. However, as we always say, it is only challenging, but it is always doable. We need to continue working, acting together, moving together, because together we are stronger. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. And I want to ask, I see we are 81 in this meeting, and I want to request us to sign the Femicide petition. I expect at the end of this meeting to see us all have signed the petition. And I would ask my sisters Ardra and Nishi to share the petition once again in the chat box so that we can all sign this petition. I now come to my last question in this second round, which will form the final question for our deliberations today. And this goes to my sister Chantal. Chantal, as a journalist, you have been actively investigating the impact of forced disappearances of women in Latin America. And what are some of your findings? Can you please share with us some of your findings as you have been doing this investigation? And also, can you share with us what role can journalists play in addressing femicide?
Sure, thank you. Well, as a woman in Mexico, you are vulnerable or exposed to various types of violence: economic, psychological, physical, sexual, public, and institutional. So the probability of being disappeared increases if you are young and poor. So over 24,000 women are reported missing across Mexico. Also, when we talk about enforced disappearances, we gotta recognize the work of women in the search for truth and justice. Across Mexico, women, mainly mothers, have created over 100 search collectives to look for their missing loved ones, mainly in mass graves. They have also faced a justice system, a patriarchal justice system alone. And they have been able in the past years to promote public policies, laws, protocols, and mechanisms. And I think the most important thing, which is also happening among other victims of gender-based violence, is the networks and collectives that they have created, you know, and the work they've been doing have been really significant for this fight against gender-based violence, and to make the government, the Mexican government, accountable for this violence. Overall, there are over 98,000 people have disappeared in Mexico. So that really talks about the levels of impunity and corruption that exist in Mexico. And when it comes about the role of journalists in addressing femicides, I think it's really important. The unethical reporting of gender-based violence remains extremely problematic, as we often see in media outlets and newspapers, right? And also governments keep undermining these cases. It's really rare when, especially in Mexico, the president or the government can really recognize the levels of violence that women are facing on a daily basis. So journalists can really raise awareness, not only about femicide, but especially about the different gender-based violences that occurs before a femicide happens, right? It can also make visible the cases as systemic issues, not as isolated events, which is something that the government narrative really tries to emphasize. And also it can make the government accountable and other state actors by following up on the legal processes and the plight of the families after the femicide or the violence happens, right? Usually the coverage only focus on the events, not on the follow-ups. And what happens after, right? To the families, what happens when it comes to mental health, to financial health, you know, we barely talk about that. And I think that now there's a change. A lot of women journalists are trying, we are trying to investigate, but we need financial support, right? To do these investigations. We need the time, right? In my case, I don't have a family, I'm single, but many of my colleagues, you know, they have kids, they don't have the financial support to really dig into these stories, and yet we continue doing it, right, despite all these obstacles. So I think it's really important that the presence of women increases in investigative journalism to continue addressing these violences.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to appreciate all speakers that have spoken, because we realize that in all our deliberations since we started the two rounds of panel that we have had, the issue of gender-based violence has come up very strongly. Issues that of violence and harassment, including sexual harassment at workplaces, has come out very strongly. And therefore, we need to join hands in the call for ratification of Convention 190 and its recommendation 206, and make sure that we can even negotiate collective bargaining agreements and include some of the clauses in our collective bargaining agreement matters that would curb gender-based violence and harassment at workplaces. But also, as women, I call upon all of us to participate in decision-making bodies and in the policy formulation, so that gender-based violence and harassment can be a thing of the past, because it is not part of the job. So I want to open up the floor for about 15 minutes or so for interventions, if there are. I see already there are about 4 questions that needs answers, and I've tried to open them from my end and I cannot. So I would ask Ardra and Nishi to send those questions directly to our speakers so that they can be able to respond effectively to those questions. But as at now, I want to open up the floor for interventions. And with this 15 minutes, I will make sure that I give you 1.5 minutes each if you have some interventions to make on the floor, and you will raise up your hands, and please be straight to the point. Tell us your comments, your interventions, and for those who can still send questions in the chat box, please do so, and our panelists are ready to respond to those questions. So I want us to raise up our hands through the button, which is the raise hand button, so that I can give you the floor to make some interventions before we come to the closure of the session. And I'm trying to look at the raise hand button. I still don't see any hands raised. Sisters, comrades who are in the meeting, the floor is open for 15 minutes to make some interventions, if any. And as we make those interventions, I continue to urge all of us, to urge our governments to ratify Convention 190 and its recommendation 260. It is time to act. And it's time to work together to make C190 a reality and to join the call for collective action globally and locally, and need to ask our governments to ratify Convention 190. There are several campaigns that we have. We have hashtag ratify C190, and you can use it. It is in the website of ITUC, and you can get it and use it. You can go to ILO website. There are so many campaigns that we call you upon to also help. And my final call again is for the signing of the Femicide petition that I expect all of us to sign before we leave. I see one hand. Ayesh, you have a response. You have the floor.
Thank you, Rose. Aisha, just before you begin, I would like to request Corina from our team to just read out all the questions so that we're all on the same page. Corina,
Sure.
please.
Thank you, Ardra. This is to Aisha for the National Network of Sex Workers. We have a question that says, how does femicide specifically affect sex workers in India? And what are the organizations like NNSW and AINSW doing to handle it? Aisha, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. As I have responded, लेकिन फिर मैं बोलना चाहूंगी जैसे कि जो भी अभी ज्यादातर अभी जो नेशनल लेवल पे हो रही है, पहली बात ऐसा है कि हम ज्यादातर ये कोशिश करना चाहते हैं कि सेक्स वर्क और ट्रैफिकिंग अलग है। यहाँ पे सेक्स वर्क में हम ये बात कर रहे हैं कि यहाँ पे काम की मान्यता होनी चाहिए, अपनी कंसेंट की भाषा होनी चाहिए, एडल्ट होनी चाहिए। सेक्स वर्क में एंट्री भी अपनी मर्जी से होनी चाहिए, अपनी कंसेंट से होनी चाहिए, और जब वो एग्जिट भी होनी चाहिए, जब होती है वो उसकी अपनी कंसेंट होनी चाहिए। इस तरह की एडवोकेसी कर रहे हैं। और वेरएस ट्रैफिकिंग जो है वो अलग चीज हम ये बताना चाहते हैं, क्योंकि ट्रैफिकिंग में जो है ट्रैफिकिंग फोर्स आती है, फोर्स के बाद में फिर वहां पे उसको फंसाना, फ्रॉड करना, उसके बाद में उसकी इच्छा के विरोध होती है। ये जो चीज है, कंसेंट की भाषा है सेक्स वर्क और ट्रैफिकिंग के अंदर में, ये चीज हम ज्यादातर बोलना चाहते हैं, बोलते आ रहे हैं, और इसी चीज की एडवोकेसी बहुत ज्यादा हम कर रहे हैं। और दूसरी चीज ये है कि हम ये भी कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि इसको अपने ग्राउंड लेवल पे भी हम इस तरह से कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि कोई अगर जैसे कि हमारी कमेटी है, जैसे कि क्राइसिस कमेटी वगैरह, नई लड़की आती है, उसकी इंक्वायरी लेना, उसकी इच्छा है कि नहीं अपने ग्राउंड लेवल मतलब अपने सेक्स वर्क में, ये सब शोधना, इसको पूछताछ करना, ये सब हमारी जिम्मेदारी है। इसीलिए हम ऑर्गेनाइज करते हैं, और कल्टिवेशन में ज्यादातर हम ये सोचते हैं कि अपना संगठन जो है वो बहुत ज्यादा मजबूत होनी चाहिए इस चीज को फाइट करने के लिए। और एडवोकेसी लेवल पे भी हम लोकल, नेशनल लेवल, ग्राउंड लेवल की तरफ में हम ये बढ़ते आ रहे हैं। दूसरी चीज ये है कि हाल ही फिलहाल में हम जहाँ पे रेज ज्यादा हो रहे हैं, सेक्स वर्क, ब्रॉथल, सब उसको एग्जिट करना है, बंद करना है, इस तरह से बात आती है, तो वहां पे हम ज्यादातर ये फोकस करते हैं कि जब सेक्स वर्कर्स को जब बंद किया जाता है, सेक्स वर्क कार्यशाला जो कि सेक्स वर्क जहाँ पे धंधा होता है वहां पे बंद करेंगे, तो किस तरह से मतलब एक स्टिग्मा होती है और डिस्क्रिमिनेशन होती है, उसके वजह से काफी औरतें इधर से उधर चली गई है, हाई रिस्क में आ गए हैं। वहां पे क्या HIV प्रिवेंशन की सुविधाएं मिल पाती है कि नहीं, सारे कम्युनिटीज जो है हाई रिस्क में आ जाती है, और वो सेफ इन्वायरमेंट ढूंढना उनको बहुत टाइम लगता है, और ये सब जो है शोषण होने की संभावना हो सकती है। ये सब सारी चीजें जो है शोषण भी होने की संभावना हो सकती है। क्योंकि अभी देखिए जैसे कि गंगा जमुना नागपुर में अभी ये केसेस हुआ है, हाल फिलहाल में ही हम लोग गए थे वहां पे खुद, कि कम्युनिटीज को आस्था में रखना और उसको लड़ाई करते रहना भी आसान बात नहीं है। कम से कम 6-8 महीना से लग रहा है कंटिन्यूसली, साल में 2-3 बार रेड्स डालते हैं और बोलते हैं कि बंद करना है, गली बंद करना है, लेकिन कैसे करेंगे, किस तरह से? बार बार बोला जाता है सेक्स वर्क को खाली करो, सेक्स वर्कर्स को खाली करो, सेक्स वर्क को बंद करो, ये बंद करना है, किस तरह से करेंगे? ये भी एक बात है। और दूसरी बात ये थी मुझे कि जैसे कि एनआरसीसी के जब कोविड के टाइम पे नेशनल ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन के साथ में भी हम लोगों ने बहुत एडवोकेसी की है, और हमने कोविड के टाइम पे एज अ हम वर्कर्स हैं, वर्कर्स के रूप में हमको मान्यता देखे और देख के हमें जो भी हमारी जो भी मूलभूत जो भी वर्कर्स को मिलनी चाहिए कोविड के परिस्थिति के अंदर में, वो हमें मिलनी चाहिए बोल के इस तरह का भी हम लोगों ने एडवोकेसी बहुत की हुई है। एंड सॉरी मैं क्वेश्चन से आउट हो गई क्या? आपकी क्वेश्चन फिर से रिपीट करेंगे?
Thank you.
अच्छा, ओके ओके, ओवर।
Yeah, I wanted to say that.
Yes, the question is how does femicide specifically affect sex workers in India? And what are the organizations like NNSW and AINSW doing to handle it? But I think it would be best that we proceed on to the next question. Thank you so much, Aisha, for answering that. Our next question is...
Yeah, please let's proceed to the next question. I also look at our time. And so I want to make sure that we keep time. We left with only about 5 minutes or so. So please do.
Perfect. So the next question is, for the countries that have ratified C190, what are the challenges to implementation? To any of our panelists that would like to answer this question, please do so.
Is there any panelists who would like to respond to this? Can you read the question again so that maybe I can respond to it if there is no panelist responding to it?
Yes. For the countries that have ratified C190, what are the challenges to implementation?
Actually, my country has not ratified C190, but as it is, I know that there are those countries that have ratified this convention. I would just advise that it is important that you now domesticate it into national laws, because once you domesticate it into national laws, it becomes very easy to implement. Sometimes there are instances where a convention is ratified and implementation becomes a challenge. But once domesticated into the country or into the national laws and policies, then it is always very easy to implement. Again, there are times that the ratification is done, but probably some of the tools that are required to realize implementation is not there. So countries are normally advised to make sure that they look into the tools that they need for the implementation of that convention and make sure that it can be implemented nationally. So my country has not ratified, but I know even in the countries that have ratified, there may be challenges with implementation. And with the advice, we can make sure that if they are domesticated in our national laws and policies, then implementation is guaranteed. So thank you. I just responded to that, although my country has not responded. So I now want to take this opportunity to allow the questions that are still in the chat box to be read so that they can be responded to, and we wrap up in 2 minutes, please. I would then invite Sandra, Ada after 2 minutes.
Okay, great. So we have another question. This is from Elena Leda. She says, hi, I'm a journalist and I have a question for whoever of you wishes to answer. Why is a new day needed if we already have November 25th?
Karina,
can we have somebody who wants to respond to this? Nishi, would you like to respond to this?
Hi, Ardra. Would you like to be able to respond to this question? Go on ahead.
yeah, definitely. Thank you, Rose. To your question, yes, November 25th is the International Day Against Violence Against Women, but we are talking about femicide here, which is the most extreme form of violence against women. And last year, as we mentioned during the anniversary, we looked at femicide very broadly as femicide, which is happening in private sphere as well as public sphere. And private sphere, for instance, domestic violence or intimate partner leading to femicides, or more in public sphere. We were today talking about the killing of women journalists and politicians and so on. So yes, there were three main reasons we thought an international day would be really helpful here. First of all, we really want to hold governments accountable because impunity is a huge issue in this sphere. And there is an urgency to act on this. So yes, demanding accountability from government is one reason. And secondly, we thought having an international day will really help unify different movements. So today we were talking about femicide in the world of work, and we heard from both formal and informal sectors. So yes, we do want to unify movements from like different geographies and different cultures and so on. So an international day would really help us to do that. And thirdly, for concerted action, and also demanding accountability and coming up with specific measures, be it femicide observatories, or there are like specific actions we can take to address femicide in different spheres. So yes, it's more about action, unifying movements, and also creating awareness on the issue, which is really like prominent in both private and public spheres. It's not, we're just not talking about world of work, though the panel was about it today. So I hope I've answered your question, Elena.
Thank you very much, Ardra, for those responses. Indeed, you've responded really to the question. And so without much ado, I want to take this opportunity now to thank you all for allowing me to moderate the two sessions, and to thank all those who came and attended virtually. And I take now the opportunity to welcome Ardra, who will now take us to the closing. Welcome, Ardra, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. We have come to the end of the session. Thanks to each of you in the audience who have joined us today. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And thanks to all the speakers and also the moderator for this very insightful conversation. The challenges faced by women workers that we have heard today, both from formal and informal sectors, need collective actions and solutions and also solidarity. So let's continue this conversation and also work together with governments, employers, trade unions, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders to both address and end gender-based violence and also femicides in the world of work. In case you have not already signed it, I request each of you to sign the femicide petition that has been shared in the chat box. Let me also take this opportunity to thank our co-sponsors, ITUC, Solidarity Center, Asia Floor Wage Alliance, Global Labor Justice International Labor Rights Forum, Tamil Nadu Textile and Common Labor Union, SWASA, and Sangram. Thank you so much for all your support over the past few weeks, and thank you for all your help with the planning and organization of this event. I would also like to thank our other allies, including Interparliamentary Union, International Transport Workers Federation, ITF, MigrantRights.org, and Journalism Initiative on Gender-Based Violence at CWGL for recommending speakers and also coordinating the communication with them. I would also like to thank our interpreters who have joined us today, Ethel, Emily, Christina, Claudia, and also thanks to Joe and Nandita Shivakumar from our co-sponsoring organizations for supporting us on the interpretation. Last but not the least, I would like to thank my team at CWGL who worked so hard behind the scenes. Melissa Upriti, Senior Director, Program and Global Advocacy at Center for Women's Global Leadership, Nishisha, Program Coordinator for the Global 16 Days Campaign, and Corina Gonzalez, Administrative Coordinator at CWGL. I would also like to thank our Executive Director, Kushanti Dharmaraj, and also Candy Berryman, Associate Director for Finance and Administration, for supporting us on this event. Thank you all again. Have a great day, great evening.